Hello, I'm Professor John Rolfe and I chair the Independent Science Panel for the Gladstone Healthy Harbour Partnership. I'm here to give a very quick rundown of the results of the 2019 report card for Gladstone. This is the 5th year in which we've had the full report card. In the report card, it assesses the environmental health of the harbour, which is broken up into 13 zones. And we do this across environmental, social, cultural and economic components. The report card covers a 12-month period from July 2018 to June 2019. The various indicators are scored on a scale from 0 to 1, and then that's converted into grades, like school grades, that go from an E, very poor, through to an A, very good. So there's 5 types of grades that can be received. The major component of the report card is the environmental sector, and it's summarised into 3 key groups. There's water and sediment quality, the habitats, and the fish and crabs, and I'll talk through each one of them in turn. Water and sediment quality is really important to assess because it measures whether there are any pressures coming into the harbour through different types of pollutants and other types of water quality impacts. Looking at water quality, the water quality has remained good for the 5th year in a row. This has been a very stable component of the report card, and it suggests that water quality is a relatively moderate impact on the environment. The dissolved metals receive exceptionally good scores. The physicochemical scores have trended down a little bit in the past year, but nutrients have trended up a little bit over the past year. Turning to sediment quality, this measures the extent to which there may have been accumulated metals and metalloids in the sediments of the harbour. So it's a measure of how pollutants have tracked over time. As a general rule, there are very low levels of metals and metalloids found in the sediments. So every year for the last 5 years, this sediment quality has received an A. And this is the case across most zones. So the scores across most zones have been very good, and we've got a couple of goods and satisfactories. Turning now to habitats. So this is a measure of how the different ecosystems are faring in the harbour. And this is assessed across corals, seagrass and mangroves. Corals are found in 2 of the 13 zones of the harbour, and these are measured each year and assessed. Now in 2019, corals have continued to decline. Corals have been in poor or very poor condition for the 5 years of the report card, and that is largely a result of the floods that occurred in 2011 and again in 2013. Unfortunately, there is no sign at the moment that corals are recovering, and one of the reasons for the poor score is high macroalgae cover found on the corals. It's not the only area where poor coral condition is apparent. So some of the other reefs in the Great Barrier Reef, in the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef, are comparable. In contrast, seagrass, which is assessed in 6 of the 13 harbour zones, has rebounded in condition. So it's been the best year for seagrass results since the report cards began, and seagrass has moved from a D in 2018 to a C in 2019. It's good to see seagrass recovering after the several years of poor condition. It's possible that it's related to the dry season that's occurred, where there's been very low rainfall and very minimal discharges into the harbour. So there's been little impact from outside the harbour, that may have led to the recovering seagrass levels. Mangroves have been assessed for the second year and received a very similar score. So they've been classified as in good condition in both years, in 2018 and 2019. A little bit of variation across the zones. Mangroves are assessed for all of the zones, but generally they're in pretty good condition. The areas where there are some declines from last year is in canopy condition, which again may be a result of the poorer condition, the lower rainfall year. The third part of the environmental component looks at the biodiversity impact, so it looks at the actual species within the harbour. And for this, fish and crabs are assessed. Fish is assessed in a couple of ways. So in the first, there's an assessment of fish health. This is the first year that fish health has been included in the harbour. And fish health has been scored across the whole harbour rather than by zone, because fish are mobile. The first way of looking at fish health has been to take some samples of fish and to evaluate them, looking at both the external components of the fish and for some at their internal organs. As a general rule, fish appear to be in very good health, so the external measures score very highly, but when the internal organs are assessed, some of them don't score as well. So barramundi and blue catfish were in fair condition, but bream, barred javelin and mullet rated to be in good condition. The second way of looking at fish health is a program which assesses only their visual condition. So what happened here was that anglers at fishing competitions in Gladstone Harbour assessed the fish as they caught them, and they provided photos, scores and some data for each fish that was caught through a mobile phone app. Again, the visual assessments of fish gave very high scores for all species that were assessed, but when a different measure was taken, this is the body condition, which compares weight against length, there were some large variations. Now, in this case, barred javelin scored very well, but dusky flathead and mangrove jack scored poorly, which means that they had lower weights per length unit for those fish. Again, it could be that there wasn't much freshwater flow from rivers and creeks into Gladstone, and that may have impacted on food availability for some of those species. The other way of measuring fish health is to look at fish recruitment. So this is measuring the extent of young fish coming into the harbour. In this measure, 2 bream species are assessed by using cast net sampling in 12 of the harbour zones and then counting how many young bream are caught in those cast nets. This year, the score was much lower than in previous years, and it received a D for poor condition, which means that there were fewer fish caught, fewer young fish recorded in the harbour than the long-term average. Again, this could have been because of the low rainfall that was observed, and we note that that when prawns caught in the same cast nets were assessed, their count was down about 50% compared to the previous year. So it's not only fish that seem to have been impacted in this way. Mud crabs were the final measure assessed in the environmental component. These were assessed according to their abundance, how many we caught, the rust lesions that could be found on their shells, and the sex ratio. So abundance scores were very varied. There were 7 zones of the harbour where mud crabs were sampled, and in one of them, at Auckland Inlet, only 1 crab was caught in the sample. There were very low levels of rust lesions again this year, so an average incidence of 7%, which is a lot lower than was recorded back in 2012. However, mud crabs didn't score particularly highly because particularly of the poor sex ratio. So what this measures is essentially the pressure on the crabs from fishing. There are a lot more females than males caught, which indicates higher fishing pressure than in a really healthy population. So the mud crabs this year the scores have slipped very slightly, and similar to 2018 has been recorded as a D. Let's look now at social results. So social results is looking at how the community interacts with Gladstone Harbour, and it scored a B, accounting for both usability, for access and for livability and well-being. The notable thing about social results is that these scores are very stable. There's been very little change over the last 5 years, and it has scored a B again, the same as the last 4 years. What this means is that the way that people in Gladstone are interacting with the harbour, their satisfaction levels and their perceptions of the harbour are remaining very similar each year. We assess cultural results for the harbour in two main ways. The first is the sense of place. Now that measures the way in which the harbour fits with people's perceptions of their well-being. The second is looking at the Indigenous cultural heritage, so the extent to which the cultural heritage of traditional owners of the harbour is in good physical condition, and that there are management strategies in place to enhance those cultural heritage items. Now in 2019, Indigenous cultural heritage wasn't measured again. We expect that those scores are very stable, and so no new surveys were conducted in 2019, and the 2018 report grades have been used instead. The sense of place scores were calculated again. That was done through a survey of over 400 people in the Gladstone community, and they were asked a number of questions about their perceptions of the harbour. Again, similar to social, the sense of place scores have been very stable over the last few years, and they remain, overall, the cultural score remains at a C. The last component of the Gladstone Harbour Scorecard is the economic component. Now this looks at the value of economic stimulus that's being generated into the harbour, the amount to which that money then stimulates the local economy, and then how much value people are getting out of the harbour, how they are spending their wealth by engaging in recreation in the harbour. And you can see that again the economic component scored a B. So the economic component has been relatively stable over time, but with a slight downtrend. Very similar results or exactly the same results between 2018 and 2019. The economic performance has remained very good, so that's because of the wealth generated by shipping, fishing and tourism in the harbour zone. The stimulus has been has remained satisfactory. That's the amount of money that's flowing through into the local economy. The unemployment rate relative to Queensland has now stabilised after some years of declining. And the economic value, that's the amount of satisfaction and expenditure on recreation in the harbour, has remained very stable and has been classified at a good level. So that gives an overall summary of the 2019 report card results. Just to summarise, in all of the components, environment, health, the social, cultural and economic, the scores have remained the same as in 2018, but within the environment there's been a little bit of adjustments up or down. So some things have scored more poorly, such as fish recruitment, whereas other components have scored better, such as seagrass. Overall though, the scores from 2018 to 2019 have remained very stable. And there you are welcome to go and look for more information by exploring the Gladstone Healthy Harbour Partnership webpage. Thank you for your attention.